My name is Sophia Brennan, 19 years old, and I thought the worst day of my life was when my mom died of cancer 3 years ago. I was wrong. The worst day was coming home from my college orientation to find my stepmother loading my mother's entire life into donation trucks. When I desperately grabbed one small jewelry box from the pile, she rolled her eyes and called it my little trinket. She had no idea that little trinket would make me a millionaire and destroy her perfect world. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from and hit that subscribe button for Revenge with Nick, because this story will show you exactly what happens when greed meets karma. I've always been the quiet one in our family, the one who keeps her head down and tries not to cause trouble. When my mom Elena died from ovarian cancer when I was 16, it felt like my entire world collapsed. She was my best friend, my biggest supporter, and the one person who truly understood me. Dad took her death hard, maybe too hard. Within 6 months, he was attending grief counseling sessions at our local community center, trying to find ways to cope with the massive hole her absence had left in our lives. That's where he met Vivian, a recently divorced real estate agent with 2 teenagers of her own. Vivian was everything my mother wasn't: loud, flashy, obsessed with appearances and social media. Where my mom preferred quiet evenings reading books and working on her watercolor paintings, Vivian posted daily Instagram stories about her workout routines and expensive skincare products. But she was also charming in a way that seemed to fill the silence my dad couldn't bear living with anymore. They started dating 8 months after Mom's funeral. I wasn't ready for it, but I understood that Dad was drowning in his grief and needed something to hold on to. Vivian came with a built-in family: 17-year-old Bryce, who spent most of his time gaming in his room, and 15-year-old Natasha, who had inherited her mother's talent for social manipulation and love of designer brands they couldn't quite afford. After 18 months of what Dad called taking things slow, he proposed to Vivian during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. They were married in a small ceremony that felt more like a real estate closing than a celebration of love. 6 weeks later, Vivian and her kids officially moved into our 3-bedroom suburban home in Millfield, Massachusetts, the same house where my parents had planned to grow old together. I was starting my freshman year at Millfield Community College, living at home to save money while working part-time at Ashworth Gallery downtown. My plan was simple: get my associate degree, then transfer to a 4-year university for art history. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and my mom had always taught me the value of being responsible with money. While other kids my age were taking on massive student loans, I was slowly but steadily building toward my future. The problem started almost immediately after Vivian moved in. She began what she called modernizing our home, which really meant erasing every trace of my mother's presence. The first thing to go were Mom's plants, a collection of succulents and herbs she'd lovingly tended in the kitchen windowsill. "They're just collecting dust and attracting bugs," Vivian announced, tossing them into the garbage one afternoon while I was at work. Next came the redecorating. Mom's soft watercolor landscapes were replaced with Vivian's preferred black and white photography prints from HomeGoods. The cozy throw pillows Mom had crocheted during her chemotherapy treatments disappeared, replaced by stiff decorative cushions that no one was allowed to actually use. Even the kitchen got an overhaul. Mom's collection of vintage teacups, accumulated over years of antiquing with her sister, was accidentally donated to make room for Vivian's matching dinnerware set. But the most sacred space remained untouched: Mom's bedroom. Dad and I had agreed that we'd leave it exactly as it was while we both processed our grief. Her easel still held her final painting, an unfinished portrait of cardinals that she'd been working on from the hospital. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser, filled with the simple pieces she'd loved, nothing expensive, but each item carrying memories of birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet moments we'd shared together. Bryce and Natasha treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. They'd monopolize the living room TV, leave messes in the kitchen for me to clean up, and speak about family plans as if I wasn't sitting right there. When I'd try to join conversations at dinner, Natasha would make subtle comments about how some people never seemed to have anything interesting to contribute. Dad, meanwhile, had thrown himself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His engineering firm was expanding into renewable energy projects, and he volunteered for every overtime opportunity that came his way. I understood why. The house felt different now, heavier somehow, and staying busy was his way of avoiding the reality that our family dynamic had fundamentally shifted. My job at Ashworth Gallery became my refuge. Mrs. Chin, the owner, had known my mother from the local arts council and had hired me partly out of kindness, but I'd proven myself capable of handling everything from customer service to basic cataloging of new acquisitions. The gallery specialized in local artists and estate sales, and I was learning to spot valuable pieces among the everyday items that came through our doors. Every evening, I'd come home to find the invisible battle lines more clearly drawn. Vivian had established herself as the queen of the household, making decisions about everything from grocery shopping to family schedules without consulting me. When I'd mention feeling left out of weekend plans, she'd smile that tight smile and say things like, "Oh, I thought you preferred your alone time," or "We didn't want to interrupt your studying." The comments about my future became more frequent as months passed. "Most kids your age are eager to get out and experience independence," Vivian would say while loading the dishwasher. When I was 19, I was already living on my own and supporting myself. The implication was clear. I was overstaying my welcome in what she now considered her home. But I held on to one thing that she couldn't touch: Mom's room. Every few days, I'd sit in there for a few minutes, just breathing in the faint scent of her lavender lotion that still lingered on the pillows. I'd run my fingers over her jewelry box, a wooden antique that had belonged to her grandmother, and feel connected to something larger than the chaos that had consumed our house. Little did I know that even that sanctuary was living on borrowed time. If you're relating to my story so far, hit that like button to show your support. And make sure you're subscribed to Revenge with Nick, because what happened next will completely change everything in my family. As winter turned to spring during my freshman year, Vivian's grip on our household tightened like a slow-turning vice. It started with small things so subtle that when I tried to explain them to my dad, they sounded petty even to my own ears. The first major power play came in March when she announced that the family would be taking weekend trips to visit Bryce's travel baseball games. "It's important we support the kids as a family unit," she declared over Sunday dinner. The problem? Every single game was scheduled during my shifts at the gallery. When I mentioned the conflict, Vivian's response was swift and dismissive. "Well, you'll just have to figure out your priorities, Sophie. Family comes first." She said it with that saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Maybe you can ask your boss to work around our schedule." Mrs. Chin was understanding when I explained the situation, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when I had to miss several Saturdays in a row. Meanwhile, Vivian made sure to post family photos from every game on Facebook, carefully cropped to show Dad, herself, Bryce, and Natasha as the perfect blended family. I existed only as the person behind the camera when I was there at all. The real gut punch came in April when I discovered that Mom's craft room had been completely transformed overnight. I came home from a particularly long day at work to find the space gutted and repainted in millennial pink. Natasha was already moving her makeup collection and ring light setup into what had been Mom's creative sanctuary. "We thought Natasha deserved her own space for her YouTube channel," Vivian explained when she saw me standing frozen in the doorway. "She's really taking off on social media, over 3,000 followers now. Your mother would have wanted the room to be used for something productive." The irony was suffocating. Mom's something productive had been creating beautiful watercolor paintings that had sold at local art fairs for years. But to Vivian, teaching teenagers how to apply highlighter was apparently more valuable than preserving the memory of my mother's artistic passion. "Where are her art supplies?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, those old things? I donated them to the high school art department. I'm sure some students can get better use out of them than just having them collect dust in boxes." That night, I cried myself to sleep for the first time since the funeral. Not just because of the lost art supplies, but because of how easily my mother's creative spirit had been erased and replaced with a teenage influencer's vanity corner. The cookbook incident happened 2 weeks later. I was looking for Mom's recipe for her famous blueberry scones, the ones she'd made every Sunday morning since I was little, when I realized her handwritten recipe collection was missing from its usual spot on the kitchen bookshelf. "Vivian, have you seen my mom's recipe binder?" I asked as she organized her new Williams-Sonoma cookbook collection. She looked up with exaggerated confusion. "Recipe binder? Oh, you mean that old notebook with all the stained pages? I think I might have accidentally included it in a donation bag last month. So sorry. But look, I got us this amazing new set of cookbooks from that celebrity chef everyone's talking about. Much more organized and professional." I stared at the pristine, glossy cookbooks that would never smell like vanilla and cinnamon, that would never have mom's handwritten notes in the margins like Sophie's favorite, or add extra chocolate chips. 20 years of family recipes, including my great-grandmother's apple pie that had been passed down for generations, were gone forever. "I can probably find similar recipes online," Vivian added cheerfully, as if that somehow made up for destroying irreplaceable family history. By May, even having friends over required navigating Vivian's complex approval process. When my study partner Jenna came over to work on our art history final project, Vivian made a point of hovering around us, making comments about the mess we were creating with our textbooks and notes. "Sophie, next time you have friends over, please check with me first," she said after Jenna left. "I like to make sure the house is presentable, and it's just courtesy to give the family a heads up when we're having guests." The family didn't include me, apparently. Bryce regularly had gaming friends over without asking anyone, and Natasha treated our living room like her personal filming studio for TikTok videos. But my quiet study sessions somehow required executive approval. The appearance criticism started subtly, but became increasingly cruel as summer approached. "Sophie, honey, are you feeling okay? You're looking a little tired lately," Vivian would say in front of Dad and the others. "Maybe some concealer under your eyes? Your mother always looked so put together, even when she was feeling under the weather." The comparison to Mom was like a knife twisting in my chest every time. Vivian knew exactly what she was doing, using my mother's memory as a weapon to make me feel inadequate. When I gained a few pounds from stress eating and spending more time studying than exercising, she'd leave fitness magazine articles on my desk with certain passages highlighted. "Just some motivation," the sticky notes would say in her perfectly neat handwriting. But it was the campaign against Mom's bedroom that revealed Vivian's true intentions. The hints started casually during family dinners in late spring. "This house has such good bones," she'd muse while cutting her grilled chicken. "But we're really not using the space efficiently. Some families would kill for an extra bedroom." When I didn't respond, she'd escalate. "It's just not healthy to shrine a bedroom like that." Grief counselors always say that moving forward requires letting go of physical attachments to the past. Dad would shift uncomfortably in his seat, but never actually defend the arrangement we'd agreed upon. His silence felt like a betrayal almost as sharp as Vivian's direct attacks. "Bryce's gaming setup is getting really cramped in his room," she continued during another dinner. "All that expensive equipment needs proper ventilation and space. It's an investment in his future. He's talking about streaming and maybe making money from it." The implication was clear. Bryce's hypothetical gaming career was more valuable than preserving my mother's memory. When I finally gathered the courage to speak up, Dad's response crushed me. "We'll discuss it as a family when the time is right," he said, avoiding my eyes. A family that apparently included everyone except the daughter, who actually had an emotional connection to that room. As my sophomore year approached, the financial pressure intensified. Vivian began making pointed comments about the cost of supporting an adult child who wasn't contributing to household expenses. "I was reading an article about teaching kids financial responsibility," she announced one morning while Dad drank his coffee. "Most child development experts say that charging rent to adult children living at home helps prepare them for the real world." She pulled out a printed article from some parenting blog, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. "At 19, I was completely independent. I had my own apartment, was working full-time, and putting myself through community college part-time. It really builds character." The comparison was infuriating. Vivian had grown up in a completely different economic climate, and she'd had family money to fall back on when times got tough. But more than that, I wasn't some deadbeat lounging around the house. I was working part-time while maintaining a 3.7 GPA and planning to transfer to a competitive 4-year program. Sophie's very responsible, Dad said weakly, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Vivian had planted seeds of doubt about whether I was taking advantage of their generosity. Of course she is, Vivian agreed with false enthusiasm. Which is why I think she'd thrive with a little more independence. Maybe it's time to look into those cute studio apartments near campus? There are some great deals right now. The great deals, she was referring to her $1,200 a month studios that would eat up my entire part-time income, leaving nothing for food, utilities, or saving for my transfer to a 4-year school. But pointing that out would just confirm her narrative that I was financially dependent and unwilling to sacrifice for my education. The final setup came in late August, just before my sophomore year began. I'd been accepted into a mandatory 3-day orientation program for students planning to transfer to 4-year universities. It was an intensive workshop covering everything from application strategies to financial aid, and attendance was required for maintaining my scholarship eligibility. I'll be gone from Thursday through Sunday, I explained to Dad and Vivian over dinner Wednesday night. The orientation is up in Burlington, and we're staying in the campus dorms. How exciting! Vivian exclaimed with theatrical enthusiasm. A little preview of your future college experience. You must be so nervous about being on your own. Dad seemed distracted, already mentally preparing for a busy work week. Drive safely and call when you get there, he said, the same thing he'd said before every school trip since I was 12. Don't worry about anything here, Vivian added, her smile bright and reassuring. Your father and I will hold down the fort. We respect your grieving process, Sophie, and we won't make any major changes while you're gone. I should have recognized the calculated kindness for what it was, the calm before the storm. But I was genuinely excited about the orientation program and the prospect of 3 days away from the suffocating tension that had become my daily reality. As I packed my bag Thursday morning, I caught a glimpse of Mom's bedroom through the cracked door. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating her easel and the unfinished cardinal painting that somehow still felt alive with possibility. I had no idea it would be the last time I'd see that room as she'd left it. If you're getting angry on my behalf right now, please drop a comment and let me know what you think about Vivian's tactics so far. And make sure you're subscribed to Revenge with Nick, because what happens when I got back home is going to blow your mind. The orientation program in Burlington was exactly what I needed, 3 days of focusing on my future instead of dwelling on the toxic atmosphere at home. I networked with transfer counselors, attended workshops on scholarship applications, and for the first time in months, felt genuinely excited about my academic prospects. The University of Vermont's art history program was everything I dreamed of, and several professors encouraged me to apply for their competitive transfer scholarship. I drove home Sunday afternoon with a folder full of application materials and a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe Vivian was right about one thing. It was time for me to become more independent. Not because I was a burden, but because I deserved better than walking on eggshells in my own home. As I turned onto our street, I noticed unusual activity in our driveway. A large white truck was parked outside our house, and I could see several people moving around near our front porch. My first thought was that Dad had finally decided to tackle some home improvement project he'd been putting off since Mom died. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a contractor's truck, it was a donation pickup truck from Goodwill. And the people weren't workers fixing our house. They were workers emptying it. I pulled into the driveway behind the truck, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. Through our open front door, I could see men in Goodwill uniforms carrying furniture, boxes, and bags toward their vehicle. Vivian stood on the porch with a clipboard, directing traffic like a general commanding an army. Careful with that dresser, she was saying to one of the workers. It's solid wood, someone will really appreciate it. I recognized that dresser. It was from Mom's bedroom. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled out of my car and ran toward the house, my orientation folder scattering papers across the driveway. What's happening? I called out, my voice cracking. Why are they taking Mom's things? Vivian looked up from her clipboard with surprise that seemed almost performative. Sophie, you're back early. We didn't expect you until this evening. Why are they taking Mom's furniture? I repeated, pushing past her into the house. The sight that greeted me inside will be burned into my memory forever. Mom's bedroom, the sacred space that had remained untouched for 3 years, was completely gutted. The walls were stripped bare, the carpet torn up, and painters were already rolling primer over the soft yellow paint Mom had chosen because it reminded her of sunflowers. We decided it was time, Vivian said from behind me, her voice matter of fact. Everything's going to charity, tax write-off. Your father and I talked it over, and we agreed that keeping a shrine wasn't healthy for anyone. I spun around to face her. You talked it over? When? I was gone for 3 days. Sophie, honey, you've been gone before. We've had this conversation building for months. Your father and I both felt like you were ready to take this step. Where is he? I demanded. Where's my dad? He's at Home Depot picking out paint colors for Bryce's new gaming room. We're thinking a nice navy blue, very masculine and modern. The casual way she said it, as if she was discussing redecorating a guest room instead of erasing my mother's existence, sent rage flooding through my veins. I ran back outside, desperate to see what they'd already taken. The Goodwill truck was nearly full. I could see Mom's easel sticking up from the back, along with boxes that I knew contained her art supplies, her books, her clothes, everything that had made that room hers. But then I spotted something that made my heart stop. One of the workers was loading a familiar wooden jewelry box into the truck, handling it carelessly as just another item on the donation list. Wait! I screamed, running toward the truck. Wait, stop! The worker paused, looking confused as I frantically climbed up into the truck bed. That's mine, I said, grabbing the jewelry box from his hands. That was my grandmother's. It wasn't technically a lie, it had been Mom's grandmother's, which made it mine by inheritance, even if no legal document said so. Ma'am, you'll need to talk to the lady with the clipboard, the worker said. We just pick up what's on the list. I clutched the jewelry box to my chest and climbed back down from the truck. Vivian was standing there watching me with an expression of annoyed patience, like I was a toddler having a tantrum in the grocery store. Sophie, you're being dramatic. We saved some things for you in a box in the garage. This was my grandmother's jewelry box, I said, holding it protectively. It's been in our family for generations. Vivian rolled her eyes in a way that made me want to scream. Fine, take your little trinket if it means that much to you. But everything else goes. We're not running a museum here. Little trinket. She called my mother's most precious possession, the jewelry box that had sat on her dresser every day of my childhood, the box where she'd kept her wedding ring during chemotherapy treatments, the box I'd watched her touch every morning like a talisman. A little trinket. What about her paintings? I asked desperately. Her art supplies? Her books? All donated, Vivian said, checking items off her clipboard. The art teacher at the high school was thrilled to get those supplies. And the library was happy to take the books. Apparently your mother had quite a collection of art history texts that they needed. I felt like I was drowning. 3 years worth of careful preservation, of maintaining her memory exactly as she'd left it, destroyed in the 3 days I'd been gone. Everything that had made my mother real, tangible, present in our lives gone. Where's Dad? I asked again, tears starting to blur my vision. I told you I heard what you said. Why isn't he here? Why isn't he stopping this? Vivian's expression softened in a way that was somehow more cruel than her earlier dismissiveness. Sophie, your father asked me to handle this because he knew it would be difficult for him. He thought you were ready for this step. We both did. The front door opened and Dad walked in, carrying paint samples and looking genuinely surprised to see me standing in the driveway holding Mom's jewelry box. Sophie, you're home early. How was orientation? The question was so normal, so disconnected from the devastation happening around us, that I couldn't process it for a moment. Dad, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They're taking everything. All of Mom's things. His face flushed slightly, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. I thought you were ready for this, sweetheart. Dr. Morrison said that holding on to physical reminders can sometimes prevent the healing process. Dr. Morrison was his grief counselor, the same one where he'd met Vivian. You discussed this with your therapist, but not with me? Sophie, you're 19 now. You're starting to build your own life. your stepmother, and I felt like this was the right time to help you move forward. Move forward. I clutched the jewelry box tighter. By throwing away everything that's left of her? Vivian stepped closer to Dad, a united front. This dramatic reaction just proves we made the right choice, she said. You've been clinging to the past instead of embracing your future. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man who had held me while I cried at Mom's funeral, who had promised we'd get through this together, who had agreed that preserving her room was part of our healing process. That man was gone, replaced by someone who could stand there and watch our life together be loaded into a donation truck. Bryce is already moving his gaming setup upstairs, Vivian continued. The room is going to be so much more functional now. And the tax deduction will really help with some of the home improvement projects we've been planning. That's when I completely broke down. Not just tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from your entire soul shattering at once. I sank down onto our front steps, still clutching the jewelry box, and cried like I hadn't cried since the day Mom died. Oh, for heaven's sake, Vivian muttered. This is exactly why we needed to rip the Band-Aid off. She would have done this no matter when we cleaned out the room. Dad looked uncomfortable, but didn't move to comfort me. Sophie, maybe you should go to your room and compose yourself. We can talk about this later when emotions aren't running so high. I looked up at him through my tears. When emotions aren't running so high. Dad, you just threw away Mom's entire life while I was gone for 3 days. When exactly would be the appropriate emotional level for this? Your mother wouldn't want you living in the past, he said, the words sounding rehearsed. She'd want you to move forward and build your own life. It was Vivian's voice coming out of his mouth, and we all knew it. The Goodwill truck pulled away 20 minutes later, taking with it every physical reminder of the woman who had loved me unconditionally for the first 16 years of my life. I watched from my bedroom window as 3 years of careful preservation disappeared around the corner, heading to donation centers where strangers would sort through her belongings like garage sale items. That evening, Vivian knocked on my door with a folder in her hands. Sophie, I've been doing some research, and I think this situation is actually a blessing in disguise, she said, settling herself on my desk chair without invitation. You're clearly ready for more independence, and I found some great studio apartments near your campus. Very affordable and perfect for a young woman starting her adult life. She spread out rental listings like she was presenting a gift. This one here has a kitchenette and everything. And look, it's only $1,200 a month, which is really reasonable for the area. Vivian, I make $800 a month at the gallery. Well, then it sounds like you'll need to pick up more hours. Or maybe find a second job. I was working 2 jobs at your age. It really builds character. The calculation was simple and cruel. She was pricing me out of my own home. We'll give you 30 days to find a place, she continued. That's more than fair, and it'll give you time to adjust to the idea. Your father and I have been talking, and we really need the space for our family to grow and heal. Bryce's gaming room is going to be perfect for his streaming career, and Natasha needs more space for her YouTube setup. I stared at the rental listings, seeing my future mapped out by someone who had spent 3 years systematically erasing my past. We're not trying to be cruel, Sophie. We're trying to help you become the independent young woman your mother would have wanted you to be. After she left, I sat alone in my room with Mom's jewelry box, the only physical piece of her I had managed to save. I opened it carefully, running my fingers over the few simple pieces inside. Her wedding ring, which she'd stopped wearing during chemo when her fingers swelled. A pair of pearl earrings from her own mother. A small silver locket with my baby photo inside. And something else. The box felt heavier than I remembered, and when I tilted it toward the light, I noticed that the bottom seemed thicker than it should be. Little did I know that Vivian's little trinket was about to change everything. If you're feeling as devastated and angry as I am right now, hit that like button, because what I discovered in that jewelry box is going to turn this entire situation upside down. Make sure you're subscribed to Revenge with Nick, because the next part of this story will show you exactly why you should never underestimate the quiet ones. My friend Jenna from college let me crash in her tiny dorm room while I figured out my next move. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it was better than spending another night in that house watching Bryce set up his gaming monitors in what used to be Mom's sacred space. I sat on Jenna's extra mattress on the floor, staring at the jewelry box in my lap. It was literally the only thing I had left of my mother. Her entire existence had been reduced to this one small wooden box that Vivian had dismissed as a little trinket. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," Jenna said softly. "I can't believe they did that while you were gone." I couldn't speak. Every time I tried to talk about it, the grief and rage would choke me. Instead, I just held the jewelry box like it might disappear too if I let go. "You can stay here as long as you need," Jenna continued. "My roommate graduated early, so there's space until they assign someone new." I nodded gratefully and opened the box one more time, touching each piece of jewelry like a talisman. Mom's wedding ring, her pearl earrings, the silver locket with my baby photo. Such simple things, but they were all I had left of a woman who had filled my entire world with love. As I started to close the box, something felt wrong. It seemed heavier than it should be, and when I lifted it, I could swear I heard something shifting inside. I ran my fingers along the bottom, pressing gently, and felt a slight give in what should have been solid wood. "Jenna, does this look weird to you?" I asked, showing her the bottom of the box. She examined it closely. "It looks like there might be a hidden compartment. My grandmother had a jewelry box like this. You push here and here at the same time." Following her guidance, I pressed 2 small spots simultaneously, and a section of the bottom slid away to reveal a hidden space. Inside were 3 old pennies and a small folded note. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper. In Mom's careful handwriting, it read, "For Sophie's future, love, Mom." "Those look really old," Jenna said, peering at the coins. "Are they valuable?" I had no idea, but something about them seemed important. The next morning, I took them to Mrs. Chin at the gallery. "Sophie, how are you holding up?" she asked when I walked in. She'd heard about what happened through the local grapevine. News travels fast in a small town. "I found these in my mom's jewelry box," I said, showing her the coins. "Do they look like anything special?" Mrs. Chin put on her reading glasses and examined them carefully. Her expression changed immediately. "Sophie, these look like 1943 copper pennies. If they're authentic, they're extremely rare." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling my friend Marcus, who specializes in rare coins. Don't let these out of your sight." 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived at the gallery. He was a serious man in his 60s who'd been dealing in rare coins and currency for decades. When he saw the pennies, his eyes widened. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice barely controlled excitement. "They were my mother's. Her grandfather was a coin collector." Marcus pulled out a magnifying glass and studied each coin meticulously. "Sophie, if these are authentic, you're looking at some of the rarest pennies in existence." In 1943, the U.S. Mint was supposed to make all pennies from steel because copper was needed for the war effort. But a few copper blanks accidentally got fed into the machines. He set down his magnifying glass. "There are only about 20 to 40 authentic 1943 copper pennies known to exist. Each one is worth anywhere from $200,000 to $1.7 million, depending on condition and provenance." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "That can't be right. I need to have these professionally authenticated, but based on initial examination, I believe you have 3 genuine 1943 copper pennies in exceptional condition." Marcus looked at me seriously. "Sophie, if I'm right, you're holding close to $3 million in your hands." The next week passed in a blur of authentication processes and paperwork. Marcus connected me with a reputable auction house in New York that specialized in rare currency. They insisted on complete confidentiality, wealthy collectors valued privacy, and media attention could actually hurt the sale price. The authentication process was thorough. X-ray analysis, weight measurements, provenance research. Everything checked out. My great-great-grandfather had been a serious coin collector, and somehow these 3 pennies had made their way down through generations to my mother, who had hidden them away for my future. The auction house estimated their combined value at $2.8 million. "We can handle this completely privately," the auction coordinator assured me over the phone. "No media, no publicity. Just a quiet sale to private collectors who appreciate the historical significance." 3 weeks later, I received a call that would change my life forever. "Miss Brennan, I'm pleased to inform you that all 3 coins have sold." After our commission and fees, you'll be receiving $2.6 million. The funds will be transferred to your account within 48 hours. I hung up the phone and stared at Jenna, who had been my emotional support through the entire process. "So?" she asked. "I'm a millionaire," I said quietly. Vivian threw away almost $3 million when she called this a little trinket. For the first time since that horrible Sunday when I came home to find my mother's life being loaded into a donation truck, I smiled. Not because of the money, though that was life-changing, but because Mom had found a way to take care of me even after she was gone. And Vivian had no idea what was coming. If your jaw just dropped, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick, because I am about to become the most dangerous person my stepfamily has ever underestimated. Having $2.6 million in your bank account changes everything about how you see the world. Suddenly, Vivian's rental listings weren't terrifying ultimatums. They were laughable suggestions from someone who had no idea what she'd just handed me. I enrolled at Boston University's prestigious art history program for the spring semester, paying the full tuition up front without blinking. I found a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in Back Bay, nothing flashy, but clean, modern, and completely mine. For the first time in 3 years, I could breathe without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. But here's the thing about revenge, it's best served cold, and I was planning to serve this dish at Arctic temperatures. I kept my windfall completely secret. To everyone at school, I was just another transfer student with financial aid. I bought sensible used furniture, shopped at regular stores, and maintained the same modest lifestyle I'd always lived. The only difference was the security of knowing I never had to depend on anyone else's mercy again. From my new apartment, I began what I privately called intelligence gathering. Social media made it remarkably easy to monitor my family's situation from a distance. Vivian's Instagram posts told a story of increasing financial strain disguised as lifestyle changes. Embracing minimalism, she captioned a photo of their nearly empty living room after they'd sold the expensive sectional sofa. Home cooking is so much more meaningful than dining out, accompanied a picture of spaghetti with Jared sauce, a far cry from the artisanal restaurants she used to frequent. But the real intelligence came from Natasha's TikTok account, where she was far less careful about family privacy. Her videos complained about having to switch from private school to public school for geographic diversity and how their family car had been downgraded when Dad traded in his BMW for a used Honda. I did some digging into Dad's engineering firm and discovered they'd lost several major contracts over the past year. The renewable energy sector was more competitive than expected, and smaller firms like his were struggling to compete with larger corporations. Meanwhile, Vivian had let her real estate license expire and was finding it harder than expected to re-enter the market after taking time off to be a full-time mom. The housing market had shifted, new technologies required training she couldn't afford, and her former contacts had moved on. Through careful observation of public records, amazing what you can find online when you know where to look, I learned that they'd refinanced their mortgage twice in the past year. They were house poor, drowning in payments for a lifestyle they could no longer afford but were too proud to abandon. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd kicked me out for being a financial burden, their own financial house of cards was collapsing. Bryce's expensive gaming setup, Natasha's designer clothes, the private school tuition, all of it was being funded by debt and desperation. I waited. Patience became my greatest weapon. Every few weeks, I'd drive by the old neighborhood, watching for signs of increasing desperation. The lawn care service disappeared first. Then the expensive cars in the driveway were replaced by older models. The elaborate Halloween decorations Vivian had always prided herself on were noticeably absent this year. By November, Natasha's social media posts had taken on a decidedly bitter tone. Some families actually care about their kids' education, she wrote after complaining about public school lunch quality. But I guess not everyone has their priorities straight. I almost laughed. If she only knew that her priorities straight comment was coming from someone whose family had literally thrown away millions of dollars while judging me for being financially dependent. I established a routine of checking in with Mrs. Chin at the gallery, both to maintain that connection and to hear local gossip. Small towns are like that. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Your father stopped by last week, she mentioned during one of my visits in December. He was asking if we knew of any freelance work for engineers. Seemed pretty stressed. Did he ask about me? I couldn't help wondering. Mrs. Chin shook her head sadly. I mentioned that you were doing well in school, and he just nodded and changed the subject. That man is carrying a lot of guilt, Sophie. Good, I thought. He should be. The perfect opportunity came right after New Year's. Natasha posted a dramatic TikTok about how their family might have to downsize because of unforeseen financial challenges. The video was clearly a plea for sympathy, complete with crocodile tears about potentially losing their home. I knew it was time. But I wasn't going to just show up and announce my windfall. That would be too easy, too quick. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they'd thrown away, to understand the magnitude of their mistake in a way that would haunt them forever. I wanted them desperate. I wanted them panicking. I wanted them to remember every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment they'd made me feel worthless. And then, when they were at their lowest point, when Vivian's carefully constructed image was crumbling and Dad was facing the reality of his choices, I would return. Not as the grieving, powerless teenager they'd bulldozed, but as the woman who held their financial salvation in her hands, the same hands that had desperately grabbed a little trinket from a donation truck while they laughed at my desperation. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for them to realize they were drowning and then decide whether or not to throw them a rope. Spoiler alert, I wasn't feeling particularly generous. 6 months later, everything I'd been waiting for finally happened. Dad's engineering firm downsized, and he was let go with 2 weeks severance. Vivian discovered that getting back into real estate wasn't as simple as she'd assumed. Her expired license required expensive continuing education courses they couldn't afford, and the market had changed completely during her time as a full-time mom. The foreclosure notice appeared in public records in March. They had 60 days before losing the house. It was time. I chose a Sunday evening in late March, knowing they'd all be home for dinner. I dressed carefully, not flashy, but clearly expensive. A silk blouse, tailored pants, understated jewelry. I wanted to look successful without being obvious about it. I rang the doorbell instead of walking in, a small power move that established I was now a guest, not a resident. Natasha answered the door, and her jaw dropped. Sophie? What are you doing here? Hello, Natasha. I thought I'd stop by for dinner. Is the family home? She led me to the dining room where Dad, Vivian, and Bryce were eating what looked like frozen lasagna, a far cry from the elaborate meals Vivian used to prepare. Sophie. Dad stood up, looking genuinely surprised and perhaps a little hopeful. This is unexpected. I hope you don't mind me dropping by, I said, settling into my old chair like I own the place. I had some news to share. Vivian's smile was tight. Of course, dear. How have you been? How's community college? Actually, I transferred to Boston University. I'm finishing my art history degree there. Dad's eyebrows raised. BU? That's expensive. Are you managing okay with student loans? I smiled. Actually, no student loans needed. I can afford it outright. The table went quiet. Vivian set down her fork. How's that possible? Sophie, you made $800 a month at that gallery. True. But I discovered something interesting in that little trinket you let me keep when you donated my mother's entire life to Goodwill. Vivian's face went pale. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo I'd saved from the auction house, the 3 1943 copper pennies displayed on authentication papers. Remember Mom's jewelry box? The one you called my little trinket when I grabbed it from your donation truck. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the photo. Those are pennies. Very special pennies. 1943 copper pennies, to be exact. Only about 30 of them exist in the world. I paused for effect. They sold at auction for $2.8 million. The silence was deafening. Vivian's voice came out as a whisper. That was in the jewelry box? Hidden compartment in the bottom. Mom left them for my future, along with a note. I looked directly at Vivian. That little trinket you almost threw away? It just paid for my entire college education and set me up for life. Dad's face had gone gray. $2.8 million? Plus, I have a beautiful apartment in Back Bay, a full investment portfolio, and enough money to never worry about rent or groceries or whether I can afford textbooks. I smiled sweetly. You know, all those things you said would build my character. Bryce found his voice first. Holy shit, Sophie. You're rich. Language, Bryce. Vivian said automatically, but her heart wasn't in it. She was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Rich is relative, I said. But yes, I'm financially secure. Very secure. Vivian's hands were shaking. If we had known. You never would have thrown away Mom's things? Never would have kicked me out? Never would have treated me like a burden? I tilted my head. Exactly, Vivian. You would have treated me better if you thought I had value. That's not, Dad started. It's exactly that, I interrupted. You threw away almost $3 million because you couldn't be bothered to look beyond your assumptions about what was worthless. Just like you threw me away because you decided I was worthless too. The irony hung in the air like smoke. Here they were, facing foreclosure, drowning in debt they'd accumulated trying to maintain an image they couldn't afford, while the daughter they'd discarded was sitting there with more money than they'd see in several lifetimes. Natasha was staring at her phone, probably calculating how much my outfit cost. Bryce kept shaking his head in disbelief. Dad looked like he might be sick. But it was Vivian's reaction that satisfied me most. The woman who had systematically erased my mother's presence, who had dismissed her most precious possessions as junk, was finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. Sophie, she said carefully, we're family. And family helps each other through difficult times. There it was. The predictable pivot from dismissal to manipulation, from little trinket to we're family. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Now I'm family? I asked. Funny how that works. The desperation in Vivian's eyes was immediate and shameless. Sophie, please. We're facing foreclosure. We could lose everything. We're family, we should help each other through difficult times. Family? I repeated. You mean like how you helped me when you threw away my mother's entire existence while I was gone for 3 days? Dad cleared his throat. Sophie, what happened was, we thought we were helping you move forward. It was an honest mistake. An honest mistake? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, you watched them load my mother's art supplies, her paintings, her clothes, everything that made her real, into a truck. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Vivian was wringing her hands now. If I had known about the coins, you would have treated me completely differently, I finished. You would have valued me if you thought I had money. But when you believed I was worthless, you treated me like garbage. Your mother would want family to stick together, Dad said desperately. That comment hit me like a slap. Don't you dare use her memory to manipulate me now. You let Vivian erase every trace of her from this house. You stood there and watched while she called my mother's most precious possession a little trinket. I stood up, looking down at all of them. You made it clear I wasn't real family when you erased her from existence. You threw away my mother's love along with all her belongings. The only reason I have anything left of her is because I fought for that one box while you all laughed at my desperation. Vivian was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. Sophie, please. We can make this right. We can be a real family now. Now that I have money, you mean? I shook my head. Here's what's going to happen. I'll help you if you publicly acknowledge what you did. Both of you. Dad leaned forward. What do you mean? Full public apology. Dad, you admit you failed to protect my mother's memory and threw away millions of dollars because you were too weak to stand up to your new wife. Vivian, you admit you systematically destroyed a grieving teenager's connection to her dead mother and threw away a fortune because you couldn't be bothered to value what mattered to me. The silence stretched for almost a minute. I won't humiliate myself publicly, Dad said finally. That's not reasonable. We made a mistake, but family forgives mistakes. Vivian added desperately. I picked up my purse. You didn't make a mistake, Vivian. You made choices. Every single day for 3 years, you chose cruelty. You chose to erase her. You chose to make me feel worthless. Those weren't mistakes, they were deliberate decisions. Sophie, please, Dad started. You had your chance to choose me, I said, walking toward the door. You chose pride instead. Enjoy the consequences. I left them sitting at that table, facing foreclosure, drowning in debt, finally understanding what they'd thrown away. They lost the house 6 weeks later. Had to move into a cramped rental apartment across town. Vivian's social media went dark as her carefully curated image crumbled. The private school enrollment ended. The luxury lifestyle disappeared. Meanwhile, I established the Elena Brennan Memorial Scholarship for art students at the local community college. Every year, it helps kids like me who are trying to build something beautiful despite difficult circumstances. I also bought my childhood home when it went up for sale. Not to live in, but to preserve it as a memorial to my mother. I restored her art room exactly as it had been, filled with her paintings and supplies. It's where I go when I miss her. Dad reaches out occasionally, usually around holidays. We have coffee sometimes, but our relationship exists entirely on my terms now. He's never quite apologized for watching my life get loaded into a donation truck, but he understands that his comfort isn't my responsibility anymore. Vivian and I have never spoken again. Last I heard, she was working retail and living in a studio apartment. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about that little trinket and realizes she held millions of dollars in her hands while calling it worthless. But here's what I learned. The money didn't heal my grief. Standing up for myself did. The coins weren't my mother's greatest gift to me. Teaching me my own worth was. 6 months after that final dinner confrontation, I was cleaning out the scholarship office when I found myself holding one of Mom's old paintbrushes that had somehow survived Vivian's purge. I smiled, thinking about how Vivian had dismissed everything Mom treasured as junk, never bothering to look deeper. Sometimes the most valuable things come in small packages. Sometimes what looks worthless to cruel people contains treasures beyond imagination. My mother's greatest gift wasn't the coins, it was teaching me that I had value that no one could take away. Vivian thought she was throwing away junk when she loaded my mother's life onto that donation truck. She threw away millions instead. That little trinket changed everything, just not the way she expected. And every time I sign another scholarship check in my mother's name, I remember that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something beautiful from the pieces they tried to break. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories about justice, family dynamics, and the power of knowing your worth. Remember, sometimes the people who dismiss you as worthless are just revealing their own inability to recognize value when they see it.